The galaxy had been quiet for a very long time. 3,000 years to be exact. 3,000 years of no wars, no invasions, no fleets crossing borders with weapons ready. The Galactic Conclave, a union of over 200 species spread across hundreds of star systems, had kept the peace for all that time. It was their greatest achievement, their proudest moment. Every species in the Conclave learned about it in their schools. Every child of every race grew up knowing that war was something ancient, something buried, something that belonged to a darker and more ignorant time. They were proud of that peace, and they had every reason to be. But peace, like most beautiful things, is fragile. And on the 412th day of the Conclave's 3,000th year of unity, something broke it. It started with a signal. Deep in the monitoring station orbiting the cold gas giant Verath 9, a young Ithene communications officer named Selara was doing her routine shift check. The Ithene were a thin, pale species with large silver eyes and long fingers built for precision work. Selara had been stationed at Verath 9 for 2 standard years. It was a quiet posting. Nothing ever happened at Verath 9. That was exactly why she liked it. She was reviewing automated frequency logs when the board lit up. Not one alert, not two. Every single monitoring frequency along the outer rift, the vast, collapsed region of space that marked the far edge of Conclave territory, went active at the same time. Selara sat up straight. Her silver eyes moved fast across the data. Ships, hundreds of them, then thousands. Then the computer stopped counting individual contacts and simply displayed a single word in large red letters across her screen. Armada. Her hands moved without her thinking. She opened the emergency channel to Conclave's Central Command and reported what she was seeing. The officer on the other end of the line went silent for several seconds. Then she heard him call out to someone in the background. Then more voices. Then an alarm she had never heard before, a deep, low tone that rolled through the station like a wave of cold water. Within the hour, the signal had gone out across the entire Conclave network. Every inhabited system, every station, every colony, every ship received the same emergency broadcast. The message was simple and terrible. The Vreth Dominion had broken the silence accord. The Obsidian Armada was moving. Most species in the Conclave had heard of the Vreth Dominion the same way children hear about monsters, as something from old stories, something sealed away and distant. The Vreth were an ancient warrior civilization that had existed long before the Conclave was formed. They had once swept through entire star systems like fire through dry grass. Dozens of species had been crushed under their advance before the Great Peace was negotiated 3,000 years ago. The Silence Accord had sealed the Vreth beyond the outer rift, and for 3 millennia they had stayed there. But the accord had expired, its terms had run their course, and the Vreth apparently had been waiting. Across the Conclave, the reaction was immediate and it was not good. On the forest world of Seth Minor, the ruling council declared a state of emergency and began moving civilians underground. On the ocean stations of the Pelari Collective, administrators started transmitting formal letters of surrender to Vreth frequencies before the Armada had even fully cleared the rift. On the Conclave's central hub station, a massive, spinning structure called the Assembly Ring, ambassadors and representatives from dozens of species gathered in emergency session and immediately began arguing about what to do, which mostly meant arguing about whether to flee or to beg. No one used the word fight, it simply did not come up. War had been gone for 3,000 years. The Conclave had no military. It had peacekeeping units, small, lightly armed ships designed to handle the rare piracy incident or border dispute. But a standing military force, an army, a fleet built for actual war. Nobody had that. Nobody had needed it. The very idea felt strange and old-fashioned, like carrying a weapon to a diplomatic dinner. Selara was still at her monitoring station when the emergency broadcast went out across all Conclave channels. She was meant to route it only to the primary member systems, the big ones, the long-standing members, the ones that had been part of the conclave for centuries. But Selara was stressed. The alarms were still going. More Vreth ships kept appearing on the long-range scans. Her fingers moved too fast across the routing panel. She sent the broadcast to every registered member on the list, including one entry near the bottom, a species that had only joined the conclave 47 years ago, a small, young civilization from a single planet in a quiet, unremarkable corner of the Orion Arm. The conclave registration file for them was thin. They had been assessed as a Level 2 civilization, spacefaring, but not significantly advanced. They had no notable military history on record. They had no colonies of note. They were, in the polite language of conclave bureaucracy, a developing member with limited strategic value. Their planet was called Earth. Selara did not think much of the routing error. She had bigger problems. She flagged it in the log and moved on. 6 minutes later, Earth responded. The message came through on the standard conclave emergency channel, clear and clean, with no static and no delay. The translator system processed it into the conclave common tongue without difficulty. It was short, very short. Transmission received. We confirm the Vreth Armada signal. Please clarify, are we looking at 40,000 ships or is that a sensor artifact? Also, define the current threat timeline. Are they weeks out or days? Selara stared at the message. She read it 3 times. No panic. No request for evacuation routes. No formal declaration of surrender. No lengthy plea for protection. Just a calm, flat, almost businesslike set of questions. The kind of message you might send if someone had told you a heavy rainstorm was coming and you wanted to know whether to bring an umbrella or a coat. She forwarded the message to the assembly ring without comment, mostly because she did not know what comment to add. At the assembly ring, the emergency session was already descending into chaos. The Pelari ambassador was arguing loudly that immediate mass evacuation was the only logical response. The Seth delegation was demanding that the conclave send envoys to the Vreth to negotiate new terms. The Harvan representative, a species of heavy, slow-moving creatures known for their careful thinking, had said nothing for 40 minutes and was clearly not planning to change that anytime soon. When Selara's forwarded message appeared on the main communication screen, the room did not quiet down immediately. It took the session moderator, a tall Ithene elder named Counselor Veth, nearly 2 minutes to get everyone's attention. Then he read the message aloud. The room went quiet. Not the quiet of calm, the quiet of confusion. "Who are the humans?" asked the Pelari ambassador, genuinely unsure. "They joined 47 years ago," said a junior conclave aide, checking her records quickly. "Single-planet civilization, Orion Arm, Category Level 2, no strategic designation." "They are asking about the threat timeline," Counselor Veth said slowly, as if saying it aloud would help him understand it better. "They are asking if 40,000 ships is a confirmed figure." "They sound calm," said the Seth ambassador, with an expression that suggested calm was the last thing he expected from anyone right now. "Should we respond?" asked the aide. Nobody answered for a moment. Then Counselor Veth, mostly because he felt something had to be done, and this at least was something, sent a reply. He confirmed the 40,000 ship count. He confirmed the Vreth Dominion's identity. He gave the estimated timeline, 11 days before the Armada would reach the first populated conclave systems. He included the casualty projections that had just been sent over from the Conclave Science Division. They were very large numbers. Earth's second message arrived in under 4 minutes. "Understood. We are reviewing the data now. One question: who is currently coordinating the defense response? We would like to make contact with them directly." The assembly ring was very quiet again. Counselor Veth looked at the message. He looked at the room. He looked at the Pelari ambassador, who was already drafting a surrender letter. He looked at the Seth delegation, who were arguing about evacuation routes. He looked at the Harvan representative, who had still not moved or spoken. Then he looked back at the message. Defense response. He typed back slowly, with the particular care of someone choosing words they never expected to need. There is no current defense coordination. The Conclave does not maintain military forces. We are assessing our options. There was a longer pause this time before Earth replied, long enough that Celara, still watching from her monitoring station, thought perhaps the humans had decided to stop responding. Perhaps they had looked at the casualty projections and done what every other species was doing. Perhaps they were already running. Then the third message came. Copy that. We will need to speak with your senior leadership as soon as possible. Please arrange a direct channel. We have some thoughts. Counselor Veth read it twice. Then he did something that surprised even himself. He felt, for the first time since the alarms had started, something other than fear. He was not sure what it was. It was small and uncertain, and he did not fully trust it, but it was there. He authorized the direct channel. Somewhere in the Orion Arm, on a pale blue planet that the rest of the galaxy had mostly ignored for 47 years, someone picked up. And the galaxy would never quite look at that small, unremarkable planet the same way again. The docking bay of the assembly ring had received thousands of ships over the years. Diplomatic cruisers, science vessels, trade transports, the long, elegant passenger ships of the Pelari, the wide, slow cargo haulers of the Harvan. Every ship that came through was registered in the Dock Masters system under a known category, a clean, neat label that told the docking crew exactly what they were dealing with. The ship that arrived from Earth did not fit neatly into any category. The dock master, an older Ithene named Pale who had worked the assembly ring for 31 years, stood at the observation window and stared at it for a long time. It was not the largest ship he had ever seen. It was not the most impressive in terms of raw size, but there was something about the shape of it that made him uncomfortable in a way he could not immediately explain. It was built with clean, hard lines. There were no decorative elements on the hull, no aesthetic flourishes, no artistic markings of the kind most conclave species use to personalize their vessels. Every surface had a purpose. Every angle looked like it had been chosen for a reason. The ship looked, Pale thought, like it had been designed by someone who had genuinely considered the possibility of getting into a fight. He entered it into the dock registry under the category, Vessel, Purpose Ambiguous. The human ambassador came out of the docking tunnel alone. His name was Director Yusuf Adebyo Crane, and he was a tall man with dark brown skin, short gray hair, and the kind of calm in his eyes that comes not from a lack of awareness but from a great deal of it. He carried a single data case in his left hand. He was dressed in a plain dark uniform with no medals, no decorations, no symbols of rank beyond a small earth insignia on his collar. He looked at the assembly ring's welcome hall, a grand space with high ceilings, glowing floor panels, and representatives of a dozen species moving through it in varying states of panic, with the quiet, unhurried attention of someone arriving early to a meeting he had already prepared for. Counselor Veth met him personally. He had decided that was appropriate, given the circumstances. They exchanged formal greetings in the conclave common tongue, which Adebyo Crane spoke without an accent and without hesitation. Veth noted that. He also noted that the human did not ask about the casualties. He did not ask about the evacuation plans. He did not ask for a summary of the current situation. He asked very simply how quickly they could get to the assembly chamber. They walked fast. The emergency session had been running for nearly 18 hours by the time Adebyo Crane took his seat at the great circular table. Around him, sat ambassadors and senior representatives from 47 conclave species. Most of them looked exhausted. Several looked frightened. The Pelari ambassador had the hollow expression of someone who had already accepted a very bad outcome and was simply waiting for it to arrive. Adebyo Crane set his data case on the table and looked around the room without rushing. The Seth ambassador spoke first because the Seth always spoke first. He gave a long summary of the crisis, the Armada's size, the projected timeline, the defensive vulnerability of the core conclave systems, the casualty projections. He spoke well. He covered everything clearly. The data was accurate. The picture he painted was thorough and honest and deeply grim. When he finished, there was a heavy silence. Then Adebyo Crane said quietly, "Who is coordinating the defense response?" The Pelari ambassador made a sound that was the Pelari equivalent of a disbelieving laugh. "There is no defense response, Director. We have explained this. The Conclave has no military capacity. We are exploring diplomatic channels and—" "I understand that," Adebyo Crane said. He was not rude. He was not dismissive. He spoke the way someone speaks when they have already moved past a point and are simply checking that everyone else is ready to move past it too. "I am asking who is coordinating the defense, because someone needs to, and if no one is doing it, then we should start now because we have 11 days. Another silence, longer this time. "Director," said the Harvin representative, speaking for the first time in the slow and deliberate way that Harvin always spoke. "With respect, the Conclave has no military. We have no fleets. We have no weapons platforms. We have nothing to coordinate." Adebyo Crane nodded once. Then he opened his data case, placed a flat projection pad on the table, and activated it. The holographic display that came up above the table was large enough for everyone in the room to see clearly. It showed a star map, a wide section of the Orion Arm, Earth's corner of the galaxy. Spread across that map, marked in neat organized clusters, were fleet positions. Hundreds of them. Then the display zoomed out and there were more. And then it zoomed out again. The room was completely silent. "Earth maintains a standing military force," Adebyo Crane said. His voice was level and plain. "The Unified Earth Defense Command currently operates 9 active fleets. The 1st through 5th fleets are positioned in the inner systems. The 6th and 7th are on deep patrol. The 12th Fleet is our rapid deployment force. The Rapid Strike Division operates independently of fleet structure. Total active warship count as of this morning is just under 14,000 vessels." Nobody spoke. He let them look at the display for a moment. Then he continued. "We also maintain 47 orbital defense stations, 312 autonomous weapons platforms, a standing ground force of approximately 22 million personnel, and a reserve force that can be mobilized within 72 hours. The Seth ambassador's mouth was open. The Pelari ambassador had forgotten, apparently, that she had been preparing to say something. The Harvin representative had stopped moving, which for a Harvin was a significant reaction. It was a younger Ithene delegate at the far end of the table who finally found words. "You how? You have been a conclave member for 47 years. You were assessed as level 2. How do you have?" She stopped, started again. "Where did it come from?" Adebyo Crane looked at her with an expression that was not unkind. "We built it," he said simply, "over a very long time." What he did not say in that moment, what he would explain more fully later to those who asked, was the longer answer. Because the longer answer required some history. Earth had been contacted by the Conclave 47 years ago. At that point, humanity had already been spacefaring for several centuries. They had colonies on 4 worlds, stations on dozens more, and a military that had been built and tested and shaped by centuries of hard experience, not with alien enemies but with themselves. Humanity had fought its own wars, terrible ones. They had nearly destroyed themselves twice. They had come through those wars changed in ways that were not always visible on the surface. One of those changes was this. They did not believe, not truly, not in their bones, that peace was permanent. They hoped for it. They worked for it. They valued it deeply. But they also remembered at a level that was almost cultural memory now, woven into their institutions and their thinking, that peace required someone willing to defend it. When they joined the conclave, they had looked at the organization carefully. They had admired it, genuinely. The achievement of 3,000 years of galactic peace was astonishing to them, remarkable, something they deeply respected. And they had also, quietly and without making any noise about it, noticed that nobody was guarding it. So they kept building. They kept training. They updated their fleets, upgraded their weapons, ran war games and tactical exercises and long-range threat assessments. They registered with the conclave, participated in trade and diplomacy and cultural exchange, and they said nothing about any of this because nobody had asked. Nobody had thought to ask. Back in the assembly chamber, Councillor Veth was the first to collect himself enough to speak in full sentences again. Director Adebyo Crane, your forces, are you saying that Earth is prepared to? We are prepared to coordinate a defense, Adebyo Crane said. Yes. Against 40,000 ships. There was a pause, not a long one. We would not be doing it alone, Adebyo Crane said. We would need the conclave's full cooperation. Logistics support, system access, communications infrastructure, whatever non-combat assets your members can provide. We can handle the military coordination, but we need the conclave behind us. The Pelari ambassador leaned forward. Her earlier surrender letter was, apparently, still sitting in her drafting folder. She had not sent it. You are talking about actual war, she said. The word felt strange in her mouth, old, like something she had only read about. I am talking about defense, Adebyo Crane said. There is a difference. We did not ask for this. We did not start this. But they are coming regardless of what we do. The only question is whether we meet them with something or with nothing. The room was quiet for a long time after that. Then Adebyo Crane reached into his data case and placed one more item on the table. It was a simple communication device, already active, already connected. He had made a call before he landed. He had not waited for the conclave's permission, because he understood that waiting for permission when a clock was running was a habit that got people killed. I have already contacted Fleet Admiral Akafer, he said. She is being woken up. The 7th and 12th fleets have been placed on deployment readiness. We can have forward elements at the outer rift approach in 7 days. Councillor Veth looked at the communication device. He looked at Adebyo Crane. He looked at the star map, still glowing above the table, showing 14,000 human warships arranged across a section of the galaxy that the rest of the conclave had mostly ignored for decades. He thought about 3,000 years of peace. He thought about what it had cost. He thought about what it might cost to lose it. And he thought, with a feeling he had not expected, that perhaps they had been very fortunate that 47 years ago, a stressed young communications officer had routed a message to a small blue planet in the Orion Arm. What do you need from us? Veth asked. Adebyo Crane picked up the communication device and stood up. Honest answers, fast decisions, and someone who makes good coffee, he said. We have a lot of planning to do. Outside, in the docking bay, the human ship sat quietly in its berth. Dock Master Pale was still looking at it through the observation window, still trying to work out what exactly it reminded him of. He finally decided. It reminded him of something that had been waiting, patiently and without complaint, for a very long time, for exactly the moment it was needed. Supreme Commander Kethvorath stood at the front of his command bridge and looked at the stars ahead of him. He was a large creature, even by Vreth standards. The Vreth were built for strength, wide bodies, thick limbs, gray-black skin that was rough and hard to the touch, and eyes the color of deep amber that caught light in a way that made them seem permanently lit from within. Kethvorath had commanded Vreth forces for over 60 years. He had crushed 2 border rebellions, dismantled a rival faction within the Dominion itself, and personally overseen the construction of the Obsidian Armada, the greatest military force the Vreth had assembled in over 1,000 years. He had spent 3,000 years waiting for this moment. Not personally, of course, but the Dominion had. The Silence Accord had been a wound in the Vreth national memory, a ceasefire forced upon them at a moment of temporary weakness, dressed up in the polite language of diplomacy. 3,000 years of sitting behind the outer rift, rebuilding, planning, perfecting. And now the accord had expired, and the Armada was moving, and the galaxy ahead of him was full of soft, peaceable species who had spent 30 centuries forgetting what war felt like. Kethvoreth was not a cruel being in the simple sense. He did not destroy for pleasure. He was a strategist, cold and careful, and in his view what was about to happen was simply the natural correction of a very long imbalance. The Conclave had built its peace on the assumption that the Vreth would stay away forever. That was not a strategy. That was wishful thinking. And wishful thinking, in Kethvoreth's experience, always ended the same way. His intelligence officer, a younger Vreth named Seville, approached with the latest reports. "The Conclave has gone into emergency session," Seville said. "Multiple member species have already begun sending formal communications toward our frequencies. Preliminary surrender signals from at least 7 systems." Kethvoreth made a low sound of acknowledgement. He had expected that. The Conclave species were not fighters. They had not been fighters for a very long time. Fear was a language they would understand quickly. "Anything unusual?" he asked. Seville hesitated for just a moment. It was a small hesitation. Kethvoreth noticed it. "There is one item," Seville said. "A minor Conclave member, a species called humans. Single-planet civilization, Orion Arm, Category Level 2 designation. They received the emergency broadcast and responded within minutes. Surrender communication." "No, Commander. They asked for clarification on the fleet count and the threat timeline." Kethvoreth looked at Seville for a moment. "Clarification." "Yes, Commander." "On the fleet count." They asked if 40,000 ships was confirmed or a sensor artifact. Kethvoreth was quiet for a few seconds. Then he made the Vreth sound that translated most closely to a dismissive exhale. "Inexperienced species. They do not understand what they are looking at." "That is the most likely explanation," Seville agreed. "Shall I flag them for priority assessment?" "No," Kethvoreth said. "A Level 2 civilization on the edge of the Orion Arm is not a variable worth spending attention on. We move on schedule." He turned back to the stars. He did not think about the humans again, not yet. At the rally point that Adebyo Crane had designated in his first planning session with the Conclave, a stretch of empty space between the Harvan outer systems and the Rift Corridor, ships had been arriving for 4 days. They did not arrive the way Conclave ships arrived. Conclave vessels, when they gathered, did so in loose formations, their comm channels open and busy with conversation, their movements unhurried and social, as if the gathering itself was an event to be experienced. There was a warmth to it, even in emergencies, a sense of community. The human ships arrived the way tools go into a toolbox, efficiently, quietly. Each vessel moved directly to its assigned position and held there. No unnecessary chatter, no decorative formations. The fleet built itself like a structure being assembled by people who had done it many times before and knew exactly where each piece went. Representatives from 12 Conclave species were present at the rally point as observers. Most of them had sent their best ships as logistical support, supply vessels, medical transports, communication relays. They had very little else to offer, but they offered what they had without complaint. In the days since Adebyo Crane's address to the Assembly, something had shifted in the Conclave's mood. It was not confidence, not exactly. It was something smaller and more tentative. The faint, cautious feeling of people who have been told that maybe, possibly, there is a door that is not yet closed. Selara of the Ithene had requested a transfer to the rally point. Her supervisor had approved it without asking why. He had probably guessed why. She stood now at an observation post aboard the Conclave Logistics ship Steady Hand and watched the human fleet take shape below her through a wide viewport. She had never seen anything like it. She had grown up learning that the galaxy was peaceful, that ships were for travel and trade and exploration, that weapons were relics of a more primitive time. Standing here, watching 14,000 warships arrange themselves into a formation she could not fully understand but which felt, even to her untrained eye, deeply purposeful. She found herself re-examining some of those lessons. Not because war was good. She did not think war was good. She thought it was terrible. But she was beginning to understand that the absence of war and the ability to defend against it were not the same thing. She had spent her whole career in the Conclave, and she had never once thought about the difference. Looking at the human fleet, she thought about it now, and the thought was uncomfortable in a way she suspected it was meant to be. The 7th Fleet arrived on the 4th day, led by a ship that the human registry listed simply as UESS Indomitable. It was a large vessel, longer than most of the others, its hull showing the small marks and repaired patches of a ship that had actually been used in the roles it was built for. It moved into position at the head of the fleet formation with the unhurried certainty of something that had been here before, or somewhere very much like here, and knew the ground. Fleet Admiral Amara Akefer had arrived. She was not what Selara had expected, though Selara could not have said clearly what she had expected. Akefer was a woman of medium height with close-cut gray hair and brown skin, weathered by decades of service. She moved through her ship with a quietness that was different from the quietness of fear. It was the quietness of focus, of someone whose attention was completely and permanently pointed at the problem in front of them. She held her first joint briefing with the Conclave Observer delegates on the 5th day. She did not use many words. She put the tactical map up, walked them through the geography of the Rift Corridor, explained the Vreth Armada's projected approach vector, and outlined the defensive plan in clear, plain terms. When the Seth Observer asked if the plan would work, she did not say yes. She said, "It is the best available option given the resources and the timeline. We will find out." The Seth Observer found this deeply unsatisfying. Selara found it the most reassuring thing she had heard in days. On the 6th day, new intelligence came in. A Conclave Deep Range probe that had been monitoring the rift sent back its final data packet before losing contact. The data was processed, and Akefer reviewed it alone first, then shared it with her senior staff, then shared a summary with the Conclave delegates. The Armada was 41,200 ships. The earlier estimate had been slightly low. The Vreth had added a second wave, a reserve formation following 3 days behind the lead fleet, presumably as a backstop if the forward Armada encountered any unexpected resistance. The Seth Observer, after seeing this new number, quietly went back to his quarters and was not seen for several hours. Most of the Conclave observers reacted with visible dread. Akefer looked at the number and made a small adjustment to one section of the tactical plan. Then she went to the ship's small canteen, got a cup of coffee, and returned to the bridge. Her expression did not change. Selara, who had been watching, found herself wondering about that. She asked one of the human crew members, a young man named Corporal Rains who had been assigned as her liaison, why the Admiral did not seem more concerned. Rains thought about the question carefully before answering. "She is concerned," he said. "She is very concerned, but concern and panic are different things. Panic makes you smaller. Concern just means you are paying attention." Selara thought about that for a long time. On the 7th day, a Vreth long-range probe entered the rally point scanner range. It was small and fast, a dark little machine designed to move through space quietly and record whatever it found. The humans detected it immediately. They did not destroy it right away. They let it sit at the edge of scanner range for 47 minutes, watching. Then HFY gave a single short order. One of her weapons officers executed it, and the probe went dark. But not before it had sent its data home. Somewhere beyond the outer rift, in the amber-lit command bridge of the Vreth flagship, Seville placed a data file in front of Kethvorath. "The probe's last transmission," Seville said, "from the coordinates the Conclave species have gathered at." Kethvorath opened the file. He looked at the fleet strength data. He looked at the formation analysis. He looked at the ship classification breakdown: warships, not transports, not science vessels, not the lightweight peacekeeping craft the Conclave normally operated. He read the species designation attached to the fleet ownership data. Human Earth, Orion Arm, Category Level 2. He stared at that last part for a moment. Category Level 2. Then he read the fleet count again. He looked at the weapons platform designations. He looked at the formation shape, not defensive, not a protective screen around civilian vessels. An offensive arrangement. The formation of something that intended to move forward, not hold back. Kethvorath sat very still for a long time. Then he said quietly, "Get me a full historical file on the humans." Seville moved to do so. The file, when it arrived, was thinner than Kethvorath would have liked. The Conclave's own record on humanity was limited, and the Vreth's independent intelligence on the species was almost nothing. They had barely rated a footnote in the Dominion's threat assessment catalog. But there were fragments, old trade records, early Conclave communications, and one brief internal Conclave Science Division report filed about 30 years ago under a category marked Behavioral Anomaly, Low Priority. The report noted that humanity, uniquely among recently admitted Conclave members, had voluntarily submitted documentation of their own military history as part of their membership application. Most species did not do this. Most species, when joining the Conclave, presented their cultural achievements, their scientific work, their artistic traditions. The humans had included all of that, but they had also included something else, a full accounting of the wars they had fought against themselves, the Fractured Century, the Siege of Titan, the Red Silence, 3 devastating conflicts that had reshaped their civilization. The report noted with some puzzlement that the humans did not seem to be embarrassed by this history. They presented it plainly, without excuse, as context. The Conclave science officer who filed the report had written, at the end, "It is unclear why this species believes their internal conflict history is relevant to their membership application. Possible cultural misunderstanding of Conclave admission norms." Kethvorath read that line twice. Then he understood something that the Conclave science officer had missed. The humans had not included their war history by accident or by cultural misunderstanding. They had included it because, to them, it was exactly relevant. It was the most important thing about them. It was the thing that explained everything else. They had fought. They had lost terrible things. They had rebuilt. They had learned not to stop fighting but to fight better, to prepare harder, to never again be caught without options. And then they had joined a peaceful galactic civilization and quietly, patiently, without saying a word to anyone, kept right on preparing. For 11 days before this moment, Kethvorath had not thought much about the humans. He thought about them now. "Adjust the forward formation," he said to Seville. "I want additional shield coverage on the lead ships, and I want hourly updates on the human fleet positions." Seville noted the orders. "Do you want to revise the timeline, Commander?" Kethvorath was quiet for a moment. Outside, the rift corridor stretched ahead of them, and beyond it, the Conclave. And somewhere in that space, a fleet of 14,000 ships built by a species that everyone had overlooked was waiting. "No," he said, "we move on schedule." He said it with the same confidence he always used. But Seville, who had served under him for 20 years, noticed something that had not been there before. He said it slightly more carefully than usual. The outer rift was not a pleasant place. It was a region of space where the normal rules bent slightly, where collapsed stellar remnants had warped local gravity into unpredictable currents, where background radiation made long-range scanning unreliable, and where the paths between systems narrowed into a handful of navigable corridors, like rivers forced through canyons. Ships could cross the rift if they knew the routes, but those routes were fixed, predictable. A fleet moving through the rift had to follow the corridors, and in the corridors you could not spread out. You came through in stages, in columns, in waves. Fleet Admiral Amara HFY had spent a great deal of time studying this. She had spent the 7 days of transit to the rally point reading every piece of information the Conclave's archive held on the Vreth Dominion. Military history, tactical records, the accounts written by species that had faced the Armada in the old wars before the Silence Accord. Most of it was 3,000 years old, but tactics rooted in geography did not age the way other things aged. The rift had not moved. The corridors were the same. And the Vreth, who had always won by overwhelming force and raw numerical superiority, had never had to develop particularly complex tactical thinking. When you could hit something with 40,000 ships, you did not need to be clever about it. Cleverness was the thing HFY intended to offer instead. She stood at the main tactical display on the bridge of the UESS Indomitable and looked at the map she had been building for days. The lead elements of the Vreth Armada were 8 hours from the rift mouth, the point where the main corridor opened out into Conclave space. That was where HFY intended to meet them. Not on the Conclave side, on the rift side. The Conclave observer delegates had reacted to this part of the plan with significant concern. The standard logic of defense was to let the enemy come to you, to fight on ground you controlled, to protect the systems and populations behind you. Going into the rift, into that strange, signal-scrambling, gravity-shifting corridor, to hit the Armada while it was still in transit was not the standard logic. It was, however, the only logic that gave them a chance. In open space, their numbers overwhelm us, HFY had explained to the delegates, using the same calm, plain voice she used for everything. 40,000 ships against 14,000 is a loss, not a close one. In the corridor, their formation is compressed. Their flanks are blind because the rift walls block sensor reach. Their rear can't push forward to support their front because the corridor won't permit it. They stop being 40,000 ships, and they start being a much smaller number fighting in a very small space. She had paused and then added, "They have never been hit in the corridor. In 3,000 years of military history, no enemy force has ever moved against them during a rift transit. Every opponent has waited for them on the other side." The Harvan observer had been quiet for a moment. Why has no one done this before? Because it requires going toward the Armada, HFY said. Most species, understandably, prefer to go in the other direction. That had ended the questions. Now it was 4 hours before contact, and the Indomitable and the strike elements of the combined Earth fleet were moving into the rift mouth. They ran dark, minimal emissions, active camouflage on the hulls, all non-essential systems powered down. They moved in tight formation, precise and quiet, like something very large trying to be very small. Solara was watching from the bridge of the steady hand, positioned well back from the rift mouth with the rest of the Conclave support fleet. She had a tactical feed open on her screen, a simplified version of the battle display that HFY's team had shared with the observers. She watched the blue markers of the human fleet move into the rift and then, one by one, go dark as their camouflage engaged. She realized she was holding her breath and made herself stop. Corporal Rains was standing nearby. He was not watching the screen. He was looking at the rift itself through the viewport, at the strange, faintly glowing edge of it where compressed space met normal space in a shimmer of refracted light. His expression was difficult to read. Solara had come to notice that the humans around her had a particular face they wore in moments like this. Not blank, Not brave in the performed way she had seen in historical dramas, just very present. As if the moment required all of them, and they were giving all of themselves to it without complaint. "Are you afraid?" she asked him. He looked at her. "Yes," he said. "But you are staying." "That's what afraid means when you've trained for something," he said. "It means you're paying attention." Inside the rift, the Vreth Armada moved forward. Keth Voreth was on the bridge of his flagship, the Dominion's Fist, watching the corridor walls on the main screen. He had moved the formation as tight as the corridor would allow. He had added the additional shielding to the forward elements that he had ordered days ago. He had done what he could to adjust for the intelligence the probe had sent home. He had not, however, seriously believed that the enemy would come to him. No one ever did. The first alert came from the forward sensor array, a brief spike of energy that the system initially flagged as a rift interference artifact. The sensor officer called it out. Keth Voreth looked at it. Seville looked at it. It was not a rift artifact. The second alert came 2 seconds later, then 12 more in the next 4 seconds. Then the display stopped counting individual contacts and showed a solid wall of energy signatures directly ahead of the lead Vreth formation, close, very close, and moving. "Enemy contact," the sensor officer called out, and his voice had in it the particular note of someone reporting something they had not believed possible until this exact moment. HFY's strike fleet hit the lead elements of the Armada at a range so close that half the standard weapon calibrations had to be overridden because the targeting systems had not been designed to operate at that distance. This was intentional. Close range neutralized the advantage of the Vreth's longer-range heavy weapons. It turned a fleet engagement into something closer to a knife fight, and in a knife fight, surprise and preparation mattered more than numbers. The first 6 minutes of the battle were the most important. HFY had drilled her crews on exactly those 6 minutes for the entire transit to the rally point. Strike fast, hit the formation cohesion first, separate the lead ships from the main body, create confusion in the Vreth command structure. The corridor walls amplified every explosion, light and heat and pressure bouncing off the compressed space on both sides, making the chaos feel larger and louder than it already was. The Vreth lead formation broke. Not completely. The Vreth were experienced fighters and their ships were genuinely formidable. But they broke in the sense that matters first in a battle. They stopped moving forward with confidence and started reacting instead of acting. And while they were reacting, HFY's second phase began. The Vreth ships that pushed through the initial strike emerged from the rift mouth into open space, expecting to find the Conclave support fleet waiting in the conventional defensive position. Instead, they found the doormat. That was what HFY's crew called it, with the particular human talent for giving mundane names to terrible things. 3 weeks before the battle, automated deployment ships running ahead of the main fleet had seeded the space beyond the rift mouth with 712 autonomous defense platforms, small, dark, independently targeted weapon stations that had been sitting quietly in the dark ever since, waiting. They had no crew. They needed no orders once activated. They simply identified Vreth ships and engaged them, one after another, with the patient and unhurried efficiency of machines that did not get tired and did not feel afraid. The Vreth ships that broke through the rift mouth found themselves not in open space, but in a maze of fire they had not known existed. Keth Voreth understood in the first hour of the battle that he had made an error in his assessment, not a catastrophic error, not yet a fatal one, but a real one. He had looked at the human fleet data and seen numbers, 14,000 ships against 40,000. He had done the mathematics of force multiplication and found them insufficient. He had not, because he had not thought he needed to, looked further. He had not asked how those 14,000 ships were organized, or what doctrine they followed, or what kind of thinking sat behind their deployment. He was asking those questions now, very urgently, In the middle of a battle he had not expected to be fighting on ground he had not chosen. The second hour of the battle was brutal in both directions. Human ships took heavy damage. The Vreth were not breaking and running. They were fighting back hard, and their ships were well built and their crews were skilled. HFY lost 11 ships in the corridor in the second hour. She had planned for losses. She had not planned lightly or without care. But she had planned with clear eyes, which meant she had planned knowing that some ships would not come back, and she had organized the fleet so that those losses did not break the overall structure. She stayed at the bridge of the Indomitable through all of it. She did not shout. She did not pace. She moved from display to display, made decisions, issued orders in a quiet voice, and drank 2 cups of coffee that she did not particularly taste. At the 14-hour mark, Keth Voreth made his assessment. He had lost nearly 18,000 ships. 18,000, just under half the Armada. The corridor had turned his greatest advantage, numbers, into a liability. He could not feed his full force into the fight because the corridor would not allow it. His reserve formation, the second wave 3 days behind him, was still in deep rift transit and would arrive to find whatever was left of the lead Armada in pieces. His supply lines were compromised. His command structure had taken 3 direct hits, and 2 senior officers were dead. And ahead of him, the human fleet was still fighting. At hour 17, Keth Voreth called Seville to his side. "Prepare withdrawal orders," he said. Seville did not show surprise. All forces, full tactical withdrawal. Signal the second wave to hold position in the rift. "Commander, shall I compose a communication to the conclave?" Keth Voreth was quiet for a moment. He looked at the tactical display. He looked at the numbers on it, his numbers, shrinking, and the human fleet's numbers, smaller but holding. "Not yet," he said. "Get me distance first." At hour 19, the Vreth withdrawal was underway. The Obsidian Armada, the force that had ended the 3,000-year peace, that had made 200 species across the galaxy reach for evacuation plans and surrender letters, was retreating back through the outer rift. On the bridge of the Steady Hand, Selara watched the tactical display in silence. The Vreth markers were moving backward. The conclave support fleet around her had gone very quiet, not the quiet of fear this time. A different kind of quiet. The kind that comes when something you did not fully believe was possible has just happened in front of you. Corporal Rains, standing nearby, let out a very slow breath. It was not quite a sigh. It was the sound of someone who had been holding something tightly for a long time and was, very carefully, beginning to let it go. On the Indomitable, Fleet Admiral HFY received the withdrawal confirmation and stood at her bridge for a long moment without speaking. Her crew around her were beginning to exhale, to exchange quiet looks, to allow the first careful edges of relief into their expressions. HFY looked at the tactical display. She looked at the empty space where 40,000 ships had been moving and were now retreating. Then she said, to no one in particular, in the same quiet voice she used for everything, "Begin damage assessment. I want full casualty reports in 20 minutes, and get engineering teams to the corridor. I want the doormat platforms recovered where possible." She picked up her coffee cup. It was empty. "Someone," she said, "please make more coffee." Outside the viewport, the rift mouth was quiet. The light of distant stars came through it, steady and cold and unchanged, as they had been for 3,000 years and would be for 3,000 more. The battle was over. The silence after the battle was different from the silence before it. Before, the silence had been the silence of fear, of 200 species holding their breath, waiting for something terrible to arrive. After, it was the silence of people who had expected to be destroyed and were not quite sure, yet, how to exist in a world where that had not happened. It was a stunned silence, a disbelieving silence, the kind that settles over a room when the news is better than anyone allowed themselves to hope. The Conclave emergency channels, which had spent 11 days carrying an endless stream of casualty projections and evacuation schedules and careful diplomatic surrender language, went quiet for several hours after Akhafer's withdrawal confirmation was broadcast across the network. Then slowly, the messages started coming back in, but different ones. Shorter, simpler. Most of them were variations of 3 words. Is it true? Counselor Veth confirmed it himself personally in a system-wide broadcast from the assembly ring. The Vreth Armada had withdrawn. The rift mouth was clear. The conclave systems were intact. He kept the statement factual and short because he was not yet sure what else to say, and he did not want to say something wrong in a moment that felt, in ways he was still processing, historic. He did not say the word victory because he was not certain it was the right word. He did not say the crisis was over because he was not certain of that either. What he said was, the immediate threat has been answered. The conclave stands. It was enough. For that moment it was enough. Deep in Vreth space, the withdrawal was not yet complete. Kethvoreth sat in his private quarters aboard the Dominion's Fist for a long time after issuing the retreat orders. He was not a being who had much practice with the experience he was currently having. Defeat was not a word that appeared often in the Vreth Dominion's internal vocabulary. It was not a state they had rehearsed. The Dominion's history was written in advances and conquests, and the 3,000 years behind the Silence Accord had been framed, always as a pause, a strategic patience, not a failure. What had happened in the Rift Corridor was not easy to frame. 18,000 ships, gone. Nearly half the Obsidian Armada, the force built over 3,000 years of waiting, dismantled in 19 hours by a species that the Dominion's own intelligence had categorized as a Level 2 civilization of no significant strategic concern. Kethvoreth was not a man who made excuses. He had made an error. He had looked at the human fleet's numbers and stopped looking. He had not asked the deeper questions. He had treated the unknown as the irrelevant, and the unknown had turned out to contain 14,000 warships and a fleet admiral who had hit him in the only place where his numbers did not protect him. He spent a long time alone with that. Then he called Seville in and dictated a message, not to the Conclave, not yet, but internally to the Dominion High Council. The message was honest, which was not an easy thing to write. He laid out what had happened, what he had failed to assess, and what he now believed. The council would not be pleased. There would be political consequences. He accepted that as the cost of the truth. The last section of the message was the part that cost him the most to write. It was his tactical recommendation going forward. The conclave species have, for 3,000 years, maintained peace through disarmament. This assessment was the foundation of our strategic planning. It is no longer accurate. An unknown variable, a single member species we failed to evaluate, has demonstrated military capacity and tactical innovation that this armada, at its current strength, is not equipped to overcome without significantly greater losses than the Dominion can sustain at this time. It is my professional assessment that a second attempt against a prepared and now allied human defensive force, without substantially revised tactics and substantially greater force, would result in catastrophic outcomes for the Dominion. I recommend strategic suspension of the current campaign pending full reassessment. He sent the message and did not wait for a reply. Then he sat at his desk for a while longer, thinking about the probe's data. Thinking about a ship called Indomitable, thinking about 14,000 ships that a civilization no one had paid attention to had built in 47 years of peaceful conclave membership, quietly, on the galactic fringe, without saying a word to anyone. He found himself, against his instincts, feeling something close to a reluctant respect, not for what had been done to him, but for the kind of thinking it represented, the long patience. The preparation that expected nothing in return but the readiness itself. In a strange way, it was the most Vreth-like thing he had ever encountered outside the Dominion. He did not say this to anyone. But he thought it. The conclave assembly session that followed the battle was, by every measure, the strangest one in the organization's 3,000-year history. It had started as an emergency session. It continued as a debrief. It turned into something harder to categorize, a kind of collective examination that the conclave had never had reason to do before. Director Adebio Crane attended. He had come directly from a communication with HFY and had not slept in 31 hours, but he did not look it, because he had long ago learned to set aside how he looked and focus on what needed to be done. The questions came from every species at the table. Most of them were about the battle itself, the tactics, the weapons platforms, the corridor strategy. A few were more uncomfortable questions, the kind that took more courage to ask because they pointed inward rather than outward. The Harvan representative, who had spent the entire crisis in careful silence until now, asked the one that Adebio Crane had been expecting. Director, you built your military in secret. You maintained it quietly for 47 years without disclosure to the conclave. You had the capacity to wage war in a galactic community built on peace. Were we wrong to trust you? The room was very still. Adebio Crane looked at the Harvan representative for a moment. He did not rush his answer, because the question deserved not to be rushed. That is a fair question, he said. I will give you an honest answer. We did not hide our military because we planned to use it against the conclave. We never intended harm to any member species. You can look at 47 years of our behavior as a member and find no action that contradicts that. We maintained our defense capacity because our history taught us that the intention to be peaceful does not protect you from those who are not. The conclave is not wrong to ask the question. But I would ask the conclave an equal question in return. He paused. If Earth had disclosed its military 47 years ago, what would have happened? Silence. Then slowly, understanding crossed several faces around the table. You would have asked us to disarm, said the Seth ambassador quietly, not accusingly, just stating the fact. It is the conclave standard for membership, Adebio Crane said. Disarmament, peaceful intent. We agreed with the peaceful intent. We could not in good conscience agree with the disarmament. So we said nothing and we participated in everything the conclave asked of us, and we hoped we would never need what we had built. He looked around the room. And then the breath came and we did. Another long silence. Counselor Veth was the one who spoke next. What you are describing, he said slowly, is a fundamental problem in the way the conclave was designed. We built our peace on trust and on the assumption that disarmament meant safety. But it meant safety because of the silence accord which no longer exists. Without the accord, our disarmament is not a sign of peace. It is a vulnerability. Yes, Adebio Crane said simply. Then what do we do? Adebio Crane had thought about this question for a long time, not in the last 11 days, for years. He had thought about it from the moment Earth joined the conclave, and he had looked at the organization's structure and seen the gap at its center. You do not all need to become what we are, he said. Most of you are not built for it, and there is nothing wrong with that. What you need is a different kind of partnership. Not every species maintaining a war fleet, but a framework and agreement. Some members contribute defense capacity. Others contribute logistics, intelligence, resources. Everyone participates. Everyone has a stake. The peace becomes something that is actively held rather than passively assumed. He looked around the table. Peace has a price tag, he said. We have been paying it alone for 47 years. We would prefer to share the cost. It was not a dramatic speech. He did not raise his voice. There were no grand gestures. It was just a man who had not slept in 31 hours saying the most honest thing he knew in a room full of people who were finally ready to hear it. In the days that followed, delegations began approaching the Earth Mission office at the assembly ring. Not all of them, not even most of them, not yet. Change in large organizations is slow, and the conclave was the largest organization in the galaxy. but some came. The Harvins sent their senior strategic advisor, a careful, thoughtful being who spent 12 hours in quiet conversation with Adebio Crane's team, asking detailed questions and saying very little himself. The Ithene sent a junior delegation that included, to Adebio Crane's quiet amusement, Solara herself, who had apparently decided that the communications desk was no longer where she was meant to be. The Seth, who had spent the entire crisis alternating between panic and diplomatic gestures, sent 3 separate delegations in the space of a week, each one asking different questions, as if they were trying to approach the subject from multiple angles simultaneously. Adebio Crane met with all of them. He answered every question honestly. He did not push. He did not apply pressure or create urgency. He understood that this kind of change could not be rushed and that rushing it would break it. He simply made himself available and told the truth when asked. Akafir, meanwhile, had stayed at the rift mouth. She had the repair ships working around the clock, recovering the doormat platforms that could be salvaged, assessing damage to the fleet, writing the detailed after-action report that military protocol required, and that she would have written even if it had not been required, because she believed that the only way to get better was to understand clearly what you had done. She allowed herself one quiet afternoon, 3 days after the battle, to stand on the observation deck of the Indomitable alone. The rift was still ahead of her, still glowing faintly at its edges, still strange and compressed and full of the particular kind of silence that only exists in spaces where a great deal has recently happened. She thought about the battle. She thought about the ships she had lost, 11 in the corridor, 4 more to Vreth weapons that had found their marks despite everything, 15 ships, hundreds of crew. She carried that the way she carried all of it, which was carefully and permanently, without putting it down or pretending it weighed less than it did. She also thought about what came next, because Akafir was not a person who stayed long in the past. The past was where you learned things, the present was where you applied them, and the future was where you prepared. The Vreth had withdrawn. The second wave was still in rift transit holding position. Keth Voreth had not sent any communication. Whether that silence meant acceptance or planning, she could not yet tell. She did not assume it meant either. She was running scenarios, new formations, new platform configurations, new tactical options that the battle had suggested to her. She had a pad of notes in her jacket pocket that she had been filling for 3 days with small, cramped writing. Corporal Rains found her there after a while. He had been bringing her reports, which was his job. He had also, she suspected, been checking on her, which was not his job but which she did not object to. He stood beside her for a moment and looked at the rift. "What do we do now, Admiral?" he asked. It was a genuine question, not a formal one. He was young, and he had just survived his first battle, and he was trying to understand what that meant. Akafir was quiet for a long moment. The kind of quiet that is actually thinking, not the kind that is performing thought. "Same thing we always do," she said. She looked at the stars beyond the rift, cold and steady and infinite and indifferent to the small, busy creatures moving among them. "We get ready for the next one," she said, "and we hope we never need it." She stood there a moment longer. Then she tucked the notepad back into her pocket, straightened her uniform, and walked back toward the bridge. There were reports to review, plans to update, crews to brief, and a galaxy that had just learned something important about itself and would need some time to understand what to do with that knowledge. Behind her, the rift mouth caught the light of distant stars and held it for a moment in that faint, shimmering glow. Then Rains turned and followed her, and the observation deck was empty, and the stars continued their long, patient watch over everything below them, over the battered fleet holding the line, over the conclave rebuilding its understanding of itself, over the Vreth regrouping in the dark, over 1,000 species on 1,000 worlds beginning, slowly and carefully, to ask new questions about old assumptions. And somewhere in the quiet Orion Arm, on a small blue planet that the rest of the galaxy was finally starting to pay attention to, ordinary life continued in the ordinary way it always did. People went to work. Children went to school. The sun rose and set. The news carried the story of what had happened at the rift, and people watched it with the particular human combination of pride and sorrow and hard-won calm that comes from a civilization that has never quite forgotten what darkness looks like, and has never quite stopped believing that light is worth keeping on. They had not been impressed by 40,000 ships. They had not been frightened into surrender. They had looked at the worst thing in the galaxy and said, quietly and practically and without any drama at all, "Tell us the timeline and we'll get to work." And that, in the end, was the most human thing of all.